Project MK Ultra belongs to the small group of Cold War operations whose notoriety endures not despite secrecy, but because of it. Launched in April 1953 under the direction of Central Intelligence Agency chemist Sidney Gottlieb, the program emerged from mounting fears that rival powers had discovered reliable methods for brainwashing prisoners and influencing foreign publics. American officials worried about falling behind in what they imagined as a mind control arms race. That anxiety, combined with the almost unlimited mandate granted to clandestine research during the early 1950s, produced an enterprise whose scale and audacity astonish even after decades of declassification. From its inception, MK Ultra was less a single study than an umbrella covering at least 149 separately funded lines of inquiry. Each subproject explored some facet of coercive or clandestine manipulation. One cluster tested hallucinogenic compounds such as lysergic acid diethylamide, mescaline, and psilocybin on both willing volunteers and unsuspecting civilians, measuring how different personalities reacted under varied circumstances. Another cluster paired hypnosis with drug administration in hopes of creating post-hypnotic commands that would lie dormant until triggered days later. A third set focused on environmental pressure rather than chemistry, subjecting subjects to prolonged sensory deprivation or carefully calibrated sleep denial, then monitoring whether confusion and isolation created openings for suggestion. The search for useful technologies did not stop at mind-altering states. Engineers under contract to the technical services staff built miniature tape recorders disguised as everyday objects, developed aerosol mechanisms for dispersing psychoactive chemicals, and experimented with coating cigarette papers in skin-absorbable toxins capable of producing short bursts of confusion. Even electroconvulsive techniques, common in psychiatric wards of the era, were folded into the portfolio. Researchers speculated that rapid cycles of shock followed by drug-assisted interviews might first erase resistance and then allow fresh belief structures to be written onto the blank slate of the mind. Some of the most vivid stories about MK Ultra come from its field operations rather than its laboratories. Beginning in 1955, the agency ran safe houses in San Francisco and New York City under the code name Operation Midnight Climax. Agents installed one-way mirrors and listening devices, then hired sex workers to bring clients to the apartments. Once inside, the men were surreptitiously dosed with LSD. Agency personnel observed the ensuing conversations, looking for patterns that suggested vulnerability to blackmail or hints about how sexual context might amplify the effects of drugs on obedience. These episodes demonstrate the morally porous boundary between research and real-world exploitation that prevailed inside the project. Ethical safeguards were almost non-existent. Although many grants moved through philanthropic cutouts to conceal CIA sponsorship, senior administrators at several universities and hospitals knew the true origin of their funding and cooperated anyway. Among them was psychiatrist Ewan Cameron at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute. With agency money, he pursued a method he called de-patterning, combining extreme drug regimens, amplified recorded messages, and lengthy bouts of induced sleep to break down and rebuild personalities. Numerous patients seeking ordinary psychiatric care left the clinic with fragmentary memory, emotional volatility, and permanent cognitive deficits. Their eventual lawsuits forced both American and Canadian governments to issue partial compensation, but only after careers and families had already been damaged beyond repair. The most tragic single casualty was Army biochemist Frank Olson. During a retreat in November 1953, fellow researchers slipped LSD into his drink without his knowledge. Over the next several days, Olson displayed intense anxiety, voiced doubts about continuing classified work, and asked for psychiatric help. Shortly after midnight on November 28th, he plunged from a hotel window in Midtown Manhattan. The CIA called it suicide and provided the family with a cursory explanation. 22 years later, congressional investigators discovered the covert drugging, and only then did the agency offer an apology and monetary settlement. Whether Olson jumped or was pushed remains debated, yet his death crystallizes the program's cavalier attitude toward human life and informed consent. Motives for sustaining MK Ultra, even after initial disappointments, were complex. Intelligence officers genuinely feared that adversaries might develop chemical or psychological tools capable of extracting secrets or turning agents against their handlers. They also envisioned American operatives using such methods abroad to destabilize hostile governments or wipe memories of sensitive missions. A culture of bureaucratic momentum further propelled the work. Once laboratories, contracts, and clearances were in place, ending them required more political capital than continuing them. Progress reports often highlighted rare laboratory successes while glossing over field failures, reinforcing a belief that greater effort or more exotic compounds might at last yield the elusive breakthrough. Political winds began to shift in the early 1960s. President John F. Kennedy's administration sought tighter oversight of covert action, and Attorney General Robert Kennedy questioned the wisdom of testing psychoactive drugs on unwitting military personnel. Gottlieb rebranded the enterprise as MK Search and narrowed its goals to defensive studies such as understanding foreign drug use. But fundamental practices changed little. Only in 1973, under the shadow of the Watergate scandals, did CIA Director Richard Helms order nearly all MK Ultra files destroyed. He anticipated that forthcoming congressional inquiries would ask uncomfortable questions about past human experimentation and chose document annihilation over disclosure. The purge was extensive yet imperfect. Roughly 20,000 financial and logistical records stored outside the main archive survived and eventually reached journalists and lawmakers. In 1975, the Rockefeller Commission laid out a preliminary narrative. 2 years later, Senator Edward Kennedy's subcommittee held public hearings that revealed for the first time the sheer number of non-consensual tests, including at least 1,500 American soldiers and civilians exposed to LSD without their prior knowledge. Those sessions seeded reforms. Congress passed language requiring that covert actions be reported to designated oversight committees. The National Research Act of 1974 and the Belmont Report of 1979 enshrined informed consent as a non-negotiable prerequisite for federally funded studies, and institutional review boards became standard across disciplines. Despite the new regulations, the haunting legacy of MK Ultra thrived outside the courtroom and legislature. Novelists, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists adopted its code name as shorthand for the dark potential of state power. Popular culture began to fill gaps left by shredded documents with elaborate scenarios of sleepers' agents, mass hypnosis, and subliminal indoctrination. While many of these tales exaggerate the sophistication of the actual science, the core facts remain unsettling enough. A democratic government sanctioned experiments that trespassed the most personal boundaries of mind and identity. Scientific lessons are equally sobering. Most MK Ultra projects failed to produce reliable methods for overriding free will. LSD effects turned out to hinge on a subject's prior expectations and environment far more than on dosage. Hypnosis produced cooperation only in individuals already inclined to comply. Sensory deprivation generated stress and confusion, but rarely yielded controllable obedience. In effect, researchers kept discovering that human cognition resists simple rewiring. Yet they pressed on because the prospect of victory in the hidden battles of the Cold War outweighed the evidence of dismal results. The true legacy of MK Ultra is therefore dual. On one side lie the direct victims whose memories and mental health were sacrificed in experiments that advanced neither medicine nor security. Their personal stories anchor the subject in lived human consequence. On the other side stand institutional safeguards that arose precisely because the project went so far beyond acceptable limits. Those safeguards are imperfect and always vulnerable to erosion by new fears, whether of terrorism, pandemics, or great power rivalry. Remembering MK Ultra is not only a matter of historical curiosity, but a warning that scientific ambition and national anxiety, left unchecked, can degrade both ethics and law. Vigilance remains necessary because the temptation to control minds has not disappeared. It has merely adopted contemporary language about neuroenhancement, cognitive security, and non-lethal weapons. Every time that temptation returns, MK Ultra offers a stark reminder of where the path can lead.